Good evening to all of you in this pretty room at the D. Seversky Mansion. And I want to thank you all for coming to this evening. This is the fall semester. Going fast already. But in any event, before we have our presentation tonight by our honored guest, I would first like to introduce Laura Smiros, who is one of the founders of the Friends Society, who are all alum of the school, the Friends of the School of Architecture and Design. And Laura and her company, architecture firm, made one of our very first scholarship awards for NYIT students. And she's here to present some tonight. Thank you, Laura.
So just to be short and sweet, we awarded 4 scholarships here of $2,500, and they're actually prorated because we had one student that was a part-time student. So, you know, certainly if you're a part-time student, you can apply as well, and then just speak to the administration about that. But the Friends group supports the students for offering these lectures, for sending you on trips. If you join the AIAS or the Interior Design, ASID, as a student chapter, we will support you in going on trips for green, help me out, John. Okay, we'll support you for the AIAS trips that you go on. The Milan exhibition, right. A lot of different programs that the students join. So we encourage everybody to join the AIAS and the ASID. For those groups, we do the scholarships, we offer the lectures here, and other events that the students feel are important. You can turn to the Friends group, and we'll support you in terms of financial benefits for those things. One of the things we're doing tonight is the scholarships. We had 4 scholarship awards, as I said, and tonight is Michael here? No. Most of our scholarship winners are actually overseas for their thesis. So tonight we have Betsali. So Betsali Richards is one of our scholarship winners, and the others just... Thank you. You're welcome. To make the... I want you to stay up for a minute for a picture. Does somebody have the camera? Michael Tambora. I wrap the others up. Rebecca, I'm sorry? Marlene Pieria from the Interiors Department, and Rebecca Kent. Thank you.
I really think it's important to acknowledge Laura for having the vision when I got here. When did we start the awards, Laura? 4? More than 4. 5 years ago, Frank Mark, my associate dean, who's in the front here, and I went over to visit their office, and it was a wonderful gesture, and it really sort of dovetailed into this incredible group called the Friends of the School of Architecture. And the end of September, we had an alumni event in New York City at something called the Union League Club, and I think there were 250 people there, NYIT alum, and students and faculty, and I think we raised $200,000 for the school. So Laura was part of the kickstart of that by just simply having this great idea. So on that note, I thank you, Laura, very much. And congratulations. Where are you sitting? I can't see. Where are you? Oh, thank you. Okay, so now on to this evening, tonight, October 16th. Goes fast. And our lecture tonight is Wyatt Frantom. Frantom. Okay. The M and the N should be switched, I think. Okay. he won't disagree. Anyway, the lecture's title is entitled Confluence by Design Influence, Architecture, Social Engineering, and Collaboration. As most of you know, I am Judy DeMaio, and I'm the Dean of the School of Architecture and Design at New York Institute of Technology. And my role tonight is brief, and it is simply to give a few instructions, and that is to remind everyone, including me, to turn off our cell phones. And second, as stated, we are an AIA ES provider, so all of you, there are sign-up sheets outside that are registered architects and AIA members. Please sign your name, and if you have your AIA number, put it there too, so that we can send this in so you get your continuing education credits. I'd like to thank all the students that are here. I'd like to thank our alum. I'd like to thank our faculty. I seem to have a congregation of them all in the front row over there, so thank you for being here. Let's see, what else is my role tonight? Oh, yes. I would like to say that this event is the fourth in our 2014 lecture series. This is the first one we've had this year out in Old Westbury. The Friends lecture is usually out in Old Westbury. On Thursday, November 13th, Robert Dodris will be lecturing at 16 West 61st Street. And Robert Dodris, his father was the esteemed Ali Dodris, who was on our faculty, and Ali Dodris actually founded the School of Architecture in, I think, 71 in Manhattan. And our first space was something called the Pythian Society on West 70th Street. If you ever go to West 70th, it looks like an Egyptian temple. And leave it to Ali to found our school there. But in any event, his son teaches for us, and they're a very ingenious family, and they're very involved in architectural technology and environmental projects. So we're hoping that you will go there. And then finally, in November 18th, our lecture will be at Steelcase. For those students who don't know it, Steelcase is right on the corner of Columbus Circle and 58th Street. Great space. It's Steelcase is a production, makes office furniture, and we have events in that space. And we would really hope that you come, assuming that we get a lot of sign-ups from out here, Old Westbury. If you sign up, there will be a bus. It picks you up here, and then it will take you into Manhattan to the lecture, and then it will bring you back. But we need to have you sign up, because we don't know if we can, if you don't have sign-ups, we don't get the bus. But it's a very good thing, and the event is a very fun thing. And the lecturer that night is Visham, Karabati, who teaches real estate at Columbia and is in the planning department at Columbia and is part of a firm. So in any event, this will be the final lecture of the semester, Vishan, and very, very, very exciting and dynamic man. And then I would like to thank Jennifer Mitchell, the School of Architecture and Design Special Events Coordinator, that is sitting, where are you? Oh, she moved to the back. There she is. And then I would like, because she's really helped us with our lecture series, and then I want to thank Laura Schranz, who's head of our development representative, and she has unfortunately just left. And then our videographer, who is Lara Hildago, who's over there in the back. And on that note, I will introduce John Sorrenti.
Thank you, Judy. It is my pleasure tonight to introduce Wyatt Frantom, AIA, who is the recent recipient of the 2014 AIA Young Architects Award and the 2014 BD plus C 40 under 40. Wyatt received his master's degree with distinction from Rice University and a Bachelor of Science degree in architecture from the University of Ohio. He is a registered architect in the state of Texas and California and is a LEED accredited professional. Wyatt is a senior designer with Gensler in Los Angeles and worked previously as a senior architectural designer with HOK in Houston. In his 15 years of professional practice, Wyatt has designed and collaborated on a diverse range of project types, including large-scale mixed-use development, corporate offices, healthcare complexes, campuses for higher education, the master planning of ground-up cities to small-scale commercial, retail, residential design projects, such as the King Abdullah University of Science and Technology in Saudi Arabia, the 80-level Capital Market Authority Office Tower in Riyadh, and the downtown LA skyline changing metropolis to the more intimately considered NBC Universal Broadcasting Center in LA, to Houston's Unitarian Church of Christianity. Wyatt has taught and lectured and research assistant professor at the University of Houston in the Gerald D. Hines College of Architecture, and has served as studio advisor for both the School of Architecture and Real Estate Development at the University of Southern California. He has lectured on professional mentorship, prefabricated modular building systems, the international practice, and has served as great critics at the Rice University College of Architecture in Houston, the University of Houston Hines Architectural, the Art Institute of Houston, and Washington University. Wyatt and his projects have received numerous architectural and designs and awards, and Wyatt and his projects have also been published in books, journals, including Architectural Record and Architectural Magazine. I was fortunate enough to meet Wyatt, I guess about 3 years ago, with his involvement with the YAF in AIA. And YAF is for architects registered 10 years and under. And Wyatt has truly been an exceptional role model in that group, and I was very impressed with him and his abilities, and thought he would be perfect since he is under 40, and this is something that I think everyone in this room could easily aspire to. And so, without further ado, I would like to introduce Wyatt Frantom.
Thanks, John. Thanks, John. So that introduction sounds much more impressive than it actually is, but thank you. And the reason that it sounds more impressive than it actually is a lot to do with this topic, and primarily that last word on the screen here, which is collaboration. The projects that I'm going to show you, the projects that John mentioned my winning awards for being published, are largely products of collaboration. And I am here as the representative of all those persons that have worked on these projects. Few quick thank yous to Judy and Frank for hosting the event tonight, to the Friends of NYIT for sponsoring the event, Laura and Jennifer for taking such good care of getting me here and getting me into the hotel early so I could have at least an hour's nap, given the fact that I was trying to sleep on the flight last night from Los Angeles. So with that, we can start. Judy did a pretty good job of reading the screen and the title, so I won't be redundant in that fact, but we architects are really good at using our words, and that's a pretty fancy title. If you boil it down, Confluence is the notion of flowing together, of coming together, and creating a single point for multiple inputs. But what that really boils down to is purposeful collaboration. It's taking all of the inputs, all of the agendas, all of the constraints and opportunities from a project and boiling it down into really one outcome, and that is confluence, or hopefully the outcome is confluence, this kind of synergistic flow of all of these agendas into one product. Just a really quick background on myself, and I should say before I start that I've really broken this down into a three-part presentation. One, I'm going to talk a little bit about myself, very little about myself, present some of my projects. As John said, I'm speaking from the perspective of a relatively young architect, relative being the operative word there because I do have some gray in the beard. But given some of the prior lectures, I guess, the esteemed Daniel Liebeskind and Zahas of the world, I speak from a practitioner's point of view, so hopefully you can take something from that. And as John said, a young architect, as defined by the AIA, is someone within their first 10 years of licensure. So that's really the perspective that I'll be speaking of from tonight. The second part of the lecture will be an overview of Gensler. So I'll do a little introduction to how they operate, who they are, if you aren't familiar with Gensler. And then thirdly, because I'm not a lecturer or a natural-born speaker, I hope to make this a little more conversational, and because we have so many bright-eyed students in the audience tonight, hopefully we can make this a bit conversational around the Q&A. But just as a brief introduction of me, I have been in the practice for about 15 years, and this is a listing, I don't have a pointer, a listing of some of the projects and typologies that I've been involved with, from commercial buildings to education facilities, health and wellness, hospitality, retail, institutional, etc. So a pretty diverse range of project types in that 15 years. And the map itself is more of a heat map of my kind of trajectory through my career. I was born in Sydney, Ohio. And if I step away from the mic, can you all hear me?
Speak louder.
Yeah? Okay. Because I'll try to point to the graphic cues a little bit. So I was born in Sydney, Ohio, which is a rural community in western Ohio. And perfect. Right about here in the Midwest. And pretty humble beginnings. Then attended the Ohio State University for undergraduate studies. While I was an undergrad, I worked for a small sole practice firm by the name of J.L. Bender there in Columbus while I was in school, and also a year after. So while I was putting my portfolio together for grad school, I worked for J.L. Bender. I applied to grad schools, numerous grad schools around the country, and was accepted at most, actually all, but decided to go to Rice University in Houston, Texas. So also while I was at grad school in Rice, I worked for another small firm, actually a moderate-sized firm, by the name of Ray and Hollington Architects, and they, at their peak, were probably about 20 persons. And then I continued to work for Ray and Hollington for about 2 years after graduating Rice in 2001, at about the same time that I got licensure in Texas in 2004. And then shortly moved to HOK in Houston, where I worked for about 5.5 years before jumping to a brief stint in Paris while I was working on a project in Saudi Arabia. You can kind of see the interconnecting trajectories here. And then was stationed in St. Louis at the HOK headquarters for a year on a project in ConocoPhillips for ConocoPhillips in Louisville, Colorado, before finally making the jump to Los Angeles, where I am now with Gensler. So all of that to say, in 15 years of practice, your life and your trajectories can take you a lot of places. You can have a pretty diverse range of experiences in that time. So I'm going to talk about 4 projects here, and I'll apologize to John in advance because he's seen this presentation, I think, at the AIA National Convention. But these projects really serve as a framework for my first 10 years of practice, that young architect period, from 2004 to 2014, first 10 years of licensure again. And 2 of these projects are domestic in nature, so the Unity Church of Christianity in Houston, and the more recently NBC Universal Broadcast Center in Los Angeles. And then 2 of those projects are international in scope, the King Abdullah University of Science and Technology, which is a mouthful to say, so I'll refer to it as KAUST from now on, as well as the Capital Market Authority in Saudi Arabia. And aside from being international domestic, there's a range of scales, so anywhere from 24,000 square feet with Unity all the way up to 5.5 million square feet with KAUST. From anywhere from 65 feet in height for Unity, way up to 76 stories for CMA, which is I think 1,300 feet tall. So just starting with Unity here, and the reason I show this is because this is really the first project with which I became or completed a project as I was an architect. As I mentioned, I got licensed in 2004, and I was actually taking my AREs, the architectural registration exams, while I was completing this project. You can kind of see up here in the right-hand corner that I was functioning as a project architect, project designer, and project manager. So all of those roles are a little bit easier to fulfill in a small firm environment, as you can imagine. And it was really the first project with which I had interaction with the client as well. It had a little bit of a legacy. The initial concept design was produced by Antoine Prédoc, so there's a little bit of geometry and planning that we took from that, but once it made its way in through the Ray and Hollington door, we took it, redefined it, and really the kind of sole concepts or primary concepts of the design being unity and this notion of light, because the liturgy of unity being non-denominational is centered around enlightenment. So the building, the end product, the outcome was really a combination of this kind of singular gesture, the Platonic form, fractured and kind of fractalized into almost a geodesic structure where the interior has a very different condition than the exterior. The exterior was almost a shear condition. The interior, as you kind of begin to see, is dematerialized into kind of fractal conditions. Upper right-hand corner there, very Corbusian, Ronschamp treatment. But all of this under a single roof, which you can see here, sloping. Seats 1,500 congregants, so not small in terms of congregation, but we, in the end, developed a kind of intimate organization, so it really felt very familial. And this is the interior shot from the stage. One of the primary kind of mandates from the pastor was he wanted to be able to walk a camel down the main aisle for Christmas liturgy. So we accomplished that among many other things. Again, you can kind of see the singular sloping roof, the unifying kind of geometry, the way it wraps and embraces, and then kind of swells up towards what was referred to as a tower of light. Beyond here, you saw in the first slide that it was more of this pyramidal apex structure. And just as a detail, and I'll try not to get into the details, it's hard not to as an architect. This ceiling is a 9-foot sandwich, construction sandwich, ceiling to roof, and it's actually occupiable. So those lights and what you can't see, it's pretty well concealed. The audio visual, or the speaker system rather, is behind these stretched fabric panels. So again, trying to reinforce the Platonic nature of the singular kind of mass. I'm going to quickly jump scales to Kaust, which was again in Thule, Saudi Arabia. This was a project that I started with HOK after about 2 years of having been with them. It came through Aramco, who was a client of ours in Houston, for the king, and it's for a graduate research institute in Saudi Arabia. So you see here, right on the Red Sea. This is the campus itself. The way that we started the project, again, speaking of collaboration, was by holding a design charrette in London in October 2006 with the client. And just to give you a sense of how quickly we moved, after that maybe 3 or 4 day design charrette, we came away with some hand sketches. And those hand sketches were scanned and sent off to Thule, Saudi Arabia, and they began moving dirt the next day. So we soon realized just what we were up against in terms of scale, magnitude of project, as well as pace of schedule. So the question became, how do we accomplish this? And I'll talk to you in a moment about that collaborative effort. But just to give you a little more orientation, this is the campus. But what we came away with from that 4-day master planning session was all of this compound here. This is multifamily residential here on the island. This is single-family residential. There's a golf course back here as well. This is the central business district, as I mentioned. In this horse shape here is the campus. And then all of this land out here is actually land reserved for private-public partnerships. Again, I mentioned that this is a research institute. So they would reserve this land for the likes of IBMs and Microsofts and Boeings in hopes of creating those private-public partnerships, funding conduits more than anything, with the university and the research that's going on there. There's a lot of sustainable efforts that I'll go into a little bit, but one of the natural settings is that this is a mangrove harbor. This is another harbor that was natural that we actually dredged deeper and then connected via a canal here. What you see on the right-hand side is a blow-up of the campus. 10 offices, 10 HOK offices were involved in this project from the start of the master planning. All of this was outside of my scope. There were 2 offices involved in the campus itself, St. Louis and Houston. Houston had the academic core buildings, which are really centered around the quad, and then St. Louis was in charge of the research facilities, which flanked the quad. And really this was dictated by the expertise in those 2 offices. St. Louis has an R&D and science and technology background, and Houston has a background with higher education and commercial buildings. Of the buildings that you see there on the right, I was the senior designer of the administration building, the conference center, the exterior of the auditorium, and what you don't see here, which I'll show you in other photos here, is the rotunda, which is kind of the grand portal and main entrance to the campus. Organizationally, it looks to be very similar to any traditional kind of campus. It, again, is centered around a quad. It has a forecourt. A little bit differently, it has a seacourt, which is connected to the harbor. All of the buildings in this direction are connected via an internal spine, pedestrian walkway. So this is a view from the forecourt, and this is a rendering. I should have mentioned that one of the King's requirements was that the entire project go from concept to construction in 30 months, and that was accomplished, although I'll say it was very set design-like. He toured the facility after the 30 months, and it really was dictated by the facilities being in use for the September 2009 school year. It was 375 students and about 75 professors that moved into the campus. So we did fulfill that 30-month deadline, but it was a task. This, again, is the forecourt. This is the administration building, the conference center and museum. That's the auditorium that I was also involved with. And then this is the rotunda structure here. So the way that we were able to accomplish this in such a short period of time was that we reached out to all the resources of global HOK. We involved 10 offices, as I mentioned, and we did a 24-hour design charrette, including the offices of Hong Kong, London, Toronto, a few other internationals, as well as some national firms, offices rather, Houston, New York, et cetera. And if you take that 24 hours times 10 offices, you end up with about a week and a half's worth of work in 24 hours. So we had a pretty good product at the end of that day. And then what we did with that was we had a number of the delegates from those offices meet in Houston, give presentations. We did some further charretting, and probably after about a week and a half, we had the basis of the campus planning. So again, very amplified schedule. Another thing that we did in order to kind of speed up or respond to the need for this pace of construction in particular was develop a kit of parts. So you can see in the prior slide that there's a consistency to the brand or the image of and the character of the campus. We took what we were referring to as a 90-10 approach. So 90% of the campus is what we would call a field condition, a very kind of typical or standard set of details. And then the other 10% is what we referred to as object building, or kind of signature elements, iconic elements, including the rotunda, the solar towers, the library on the other side, which I'll show to you in a minute. And this allowed us to kind of speed up not only documentation in the design, but also later at the construction. Another element that was critical to that was procurement of materials. There weren't enough available palm trees in the world to fulfill the landscape plans that we had developed, and that was the case for a lot of the materials. So what ended up on the buildings was largely dictated by the materials that were available and the systems that were available. So you can see we used a terracotta out of Germany, and they actually built an entirely new plant strictly for this project in order to fulfill the the procurement mandates. And of course, you know, we didn't want to necessarily export an American style. So we took a lot of the characteristics from architecture of the region, notions of the souk, shading, the mashrabiyah, which is similar to the screen that you see here with the perforated metal, and instilled those kind of cultural aspects and characteristics into the architecture to make it not only culturally specific to the locale, but also evident of this kind of world-class facility. What you're seeing here is some of the structural elements for the rotunda, which is this element that I mentioned. It's a hyperbolic paraboloid, and each of those members is actually straight, but as well as the glass. Those are all planar glass, but the way that they're arranged in relation to each other makes for the shape. And again, this is the front door to the campus, as well as the administration building. This is another rendering view from the opposite direction. This is, again, the quad, the C court. This is what I was referring to with regard to the 10% of iconic elements, the library. It's really the jewel piece of the campus. There are a lot of sustainable features in the campus, including solar PV, which you see on the roofs here, solar thermal, and then the solar towers, which I mentioned also being iconic elements, were basically a response to the natural climate of the region, as well as the orientation of the building, because there's this nice wind that comes off of the Red Sea, but it's not enough to kind of really cool the space considerably. So what we did was we extended these fingers out towards the Red Sea to capture as much of that prevailing wind as possible, and then we amplified it by installing these solar towers into two of the outdoor atria. And basically what that does, given the height and the assembly, is it superheats the tower at the top. And by virtue of that, it draws the air through the space up and out, basically a solar chimney. This was the first LEED certified project in Saudi Arabia. And in fact, our team worked with USGBC to bring LEED to Saudi. It was the largest LEED Platinum development in the world at the time. I think Masdar may have surpassed it. This is a view looking out from the administration building, president's office, again, which I designed, out towards the applied math building. And another view that shows the library on the right-hand side there. And that's the library. A colleague of mine out of the Houston office designed that, and that's garnered numerous awards. Pretty fantastic. The third project is the Cma Tower in Riyadh, and we learned a lot actually from KAUST, as you can imagine. And what we learned primarily is that we'd gained a basis of knowledge in the region that we didn't want to lose. So when this project came about, what we did was actually utilize a good portion of the same team to jump onto this project. This is in the King Abdullah Financial District, just outside of Riyadh. It's essentially a ground-up city outside of the city of Riyadh. King Abdullah Financial District is really defined by these 5 tall towers. This was, given the fact that it's highlighted here, obviously the one that we worked on. And much in the same way that HOK defined the design principles for KAUST, a firm by the name of Henning Larsen defined the design principles for this entire development. And that really had to do with fractal architecture, which you can see not only in our building, but in some of the surrounding structures as well. There are a lot of gemstones in the dried riverbeds of Saudi, these natural constructs by the name of wadi. And this is a 380 meter tall tower, which surpasses the 300 meter tall Kingdom Center, which was the tallest tower in Riyadh and in Saudi. So this will be the tallest tower in Saudi once it's finished. It's under construction now. Again, another project with HOK. I was one of 2 senior designers on the project. And again, collaborative effort. We had a lot of junior design technicians that worked with us, supporting us, as well as a design director, both from St. Louis and Houston. I was primarily the lead on the exterior systems, but again, we had a facade consultant that helped. So what you see here in the structure is what we refer to as a tri-petal scheme. There are 3 petals, and let me flip to here you go. There are 3 petals that make up the kind of cylindrical form of the building, and separating those 3 petals are what we refer to as pleats. You can see it here. The end design is very much an integrated high-performance skin. It's solar control, it's facade access, and it's solar generation. So we have PV along the fins. You can see the fins here. These are solar fins. We have PV on those fins at the crown, as well as PV on these chassis at the interior of the crown. As you can imagine, a glass tower in Riyadh is pretty difficult to shade from exposure. There's incidents 24 hours, or not 24 hours, but most of the day. So given the fact that each of these planes is a different angle, a different azimuth in terms of how it receives solar incidence, each of those was specifically tuned to that orientation and to that azimuth. So not only in elevation are they rotated, they're rotated in a plan as well. And this is just a shot of the base. Again, this was a collaborative effort with the St. Louis office, so Houston was designing the tower while St. Louis was designing the podium. And I'm talking a lot about the relationships tonight because I want you all to be aware, especially the students, obviously, that it takes an entire team to pull something like this off. Just some construction photos here. This is a mock-up of the gantry system. So I mentioned facade access. The pleats were specifically designed for facade access. So there are 3 cranes at the top. Those would lower booms for access to these catwalk structures. And the service technicians would get off and clean the windows and service the facade as necessary. So basically exterior elevators. This building should be complete next year, topped out. And then the last project I wanted to show you from my personal portfolio is a project that just completed construction. Oddly enough, or coincidentally enough, we started design of this shortly after I left HOK. This is my first project with Gensler, and it's already finished and occupied by NBC Universal. It's the NBC Universal Broadcast Center, also now known as the Brokaw Center for Journalism. So this is what we started with. This is what we would refer to as a reposition project. We took an existing building, or actually 2 structures. You can see it here in this existing photo. 2 twin buildings that were designed in the 70s by SOM. And of course, it's always great fun to dismantle one of your competitors' buildings, but they were a great design to begin with. The only difference is that they were originally designed for Technicolor. And Technicolor at the time was very chemically driven. It was film processing, basically. And with NBC Universal Net News, which was our client moving in, we needed to open it up because all of this glass that you see here is opacified glass, so there's literally no daylight coming into the space. This was the first hole that we popped into the exterior. Again, this was my first project with Gensler, my first project in LA. I live right up here. This is in Studio City. I don't know if you all have been here, but this is the Universal Studios theme park. This is the back lot where you take the tours, and this is what's referred to as the commercial district. The 2 buildings that I worked on are up here. This is the LA River, which if you're not familiar with, is basically a concrete culvert. So you can see that already that the buildings are pretty isolated from everything else, and our goal was to connect these 2 buildings to the commercial district at large. There's an existing parking lot here, which at the time of construction was occupied by Desperate Housewives trailers. This is a large parking structure, and that's a parking structure. So it was obviously a task to make the connection. And this is some of the architecture along the commercial district, pretty modern in nature. But the client wanted to do something like that, which was more reminiscent of studios back in the day. We talked them out of that. But what we did do is we kind of boiled that architecture, that vernacular, down to a set of abstract terms that we then applied. So texture, outdoor amenity, California lifestyle, and applied it to our building. What you can see here is our buildings in relation to the existing conditions. So this entrance actually slopes down to a lower level loading dock, and each building is 3 levels. So what we did in order to connect it to the larger promenade of the commercial district was actually floated a bridge, a pedestrian bridge, across that lower access and created an outdoor courtyard that served as almost a heart between the 2 buildings. In essence, bringing the buildings into a conversation with one another. And you'll see that there's probably in this building more than any other design, the culmination of some of the other projects, you know, the terracotta material from Kaust, the use of screening from CMA, and you know, notions of outdoor also from Kaust. And the screens are, again, similar to the CMA, solar tuned. And I want to jump ahead because I think I'm running out of time, because I want to talk a little bit about Gensler and give everyone plenty of time for some Q&A. I'm now with Gensler, and the last project that I showed you is the only one that came from that office. But Gensler, if you aren't familiar, is a global practice, design practice. Unlike some of the other global firms, we don't have engineering, so we're strictly architecture planning and strategic consulting. And it has a founder, Art Gensler, pretty remarkable guy. He's a New York native. He went to Cornell and moved shortly after graduation to San Francisco and hung his shingle in 1965. And I've heard Art speak a couple of times. Again, he's a pretty remarkable guy. But he's very much focused on this concept of building, the built environment kind of is almost secondary to the client relations. The client relations are really what affords us to do the projects that we are involved in. And those client relations come about first and foremost through people. I heard him at a fireside chat in our LA office one time, and he was asked, you know, what one characteristic do you have that makes you successful beyond all others? And he said that he's really good at hiring. So it really, truly is about getting the right people on the bus and heading in the same trajectory, for Art anyway, and for Gensler. I'm going to breeze through this because I believe I'm running out of time. But I kind of want to just focus a little bit on these next 2 slides because there's maybe a misconception about Gensler, and that we're this 800-pound gorilla in the world. And of course, we have a number of offices worldwide. But really, when you boil it down to the way that we function, my daily routine is no different now than what it was at the first firm that I worked with, the sole practitioner. It's really about these relationships of the studio, and you all have that same relationship here at school. There's a point of diminishing return. When the studio gets too big, you're not going to learn as much from your professor. In the same way, if a studio gets too large at a Gensler or an HOK, it becomes difficult to manage and difficult to lead. Those studios are really the seed of the offices. And those offices are the seeds of our regions, and we really function on a regional basis. For instance, in our Southwest region, the hub is Los Angeles, and we have offices in San Diego, Phoenix, Denver, Newport Beach. But really, we function on a regional level because there's advantage for business development. We can chase clients with a more concerted effort. As you can see, this is the reason that LA is the hub. We have over 500 people. This is what we are in the region. And this is how we stack up nationally. But again, more so than this global structure that is pretty apparent, it's really about the people. So we don't aspire necessarily to be big. We're not being big for the sake of being big. We're big by virtue of the fact that we're growing our people. Every single office that we start is based on a person, individual, and expertise. We don't acquire, we don't merge. It's really allowing our people to be leaders in their business sectors. I'm going to flip through a few of these. So we have 46 locations internationally, 4,600 staff members. And those are the countries we've worked in. And we can work in all of those countries because we have 85% repeat business. This again is structured, but we have 27 different practice areas, which are disciplines. I am somewhere here. I'm in commercial office buildings. These are some of the others, areas of expertise. And I'm going to flip through some of these projects from the LA office. It's a bit of eyewash, but just to give you a sense of what we do. This is the Shanghai Tower. It'll be the second tallest tower in the world when complete, which will be next year. After? The Burj Al Arab, I think is the name, in Dubai. It will house 20,000 occupants. A small city. City center in Vegas. This is in LA. This project and the one prior were out of my studio, commercial office buildings. But you can see some of the clients, Hyundai, these are global clients, so we do work for them in LA, we do work for them in other countries as well. We're crossing our fingers on this one. If you haven't heard, LA is vying for an NFL team. This is the Broad Museum, which is designed with Diller Scafidio, Renfro. I'm going to show this slide because I'm working on a project now which is here, called Metropolis. Just broke ground on that, and there it is. It's actually split into two phases. I was the designer of these two towers. Another project that I worked on in Hollywood. This is another reposition. And that's interior shots of that project. This is another project down the street from that one prior, which is in concept at this point. Notion of a vertical campus. And this is the Gensler Los Angeles office. We moved downtown about 3 years ago. That's the interior of our office. And I'm actually going to end it there. I had a few more slides which wrapped it up, but I'd like to open it up to questions, if that's all right. Yeah, okay. So just to kind of wrap up this idea of Confluence, there's a way of working and a way that we're perceived in the industry as being building designers. And I know as you're working through your projects in school, you don't want to be associated with being a building designer per se. I think the one skill that we come away with from school is that we're really problem solvers. So this is kind of the old partie in architectural lingo of the way that we want to, or the way that we are perceived, that there's a very kind of fragmented and disconnected way of the design leader functioning with the team members, almost like a studio professor leading his studio. And we have all of these other influences, whether they're stakeholders, policymakers, the client, etc. But what happens here through these connections that everyone has their own personal agenda. It's not really synchronized towards an outcome. So the outcome, which is opposite of Confluence, is that you have a very thin design space. And it's a project, it's a building. As opposed to being more integral and holistic and having a project which encompasses all of those people, all of those members and agendas, whether that they are diverse, divergent, a way of kind of centering that around a single idea and a single desire, aspiration, and then functioning together with an operative logic. And really what this boils down to is everyone has to get on the same page and communicate. The reason that this is so vital now, and I know speaking to Bethany at dinner with regard to urbanized, our cities are growing at an exponential rate. They're becoming urbanized at an exponential rate. They're becoming densified at an exponential rate. So in order to deal with this growth, this development, we have to find ways of bringing in all the stakeholders, all the players, and working together. Because it's not just about architecture, it's not about buildings, it's about integrated solutions. It's about resources, resource management, water, food, energy, etc. And a lot of that is dictated by policy, so we have to find these ways to bridge that gap. So this is Confluence. This is what's called a murmuration of Starlings. These are all, you can kind of make it out with the pixelation, birds, but they coalesce to make this single form, which is pretty artistic, this dance. And of course I said I was from Ohio, so this is Confluence. This is the human wave at a sporting event. You know, all of these individuals coming together to create a single form. And this too is Confluence, how we come together in our practices, in our studios, and chase a single goal, a single outcome, and create this confluence. And this is our, again, Gensler LA office. And that's me without a beard. That's what I usually look like. So thank you all.
Thank you. Really good. Thank you. Good for students.
My pleasure.
to do.
Yeah, of course.
Thank you, Wyatt. Are there questions, please? It takes them a little while to get them.
Warmed up.
Any questions?
How many people on your team?
Depends on the project. Our studio, the commercial office building developer studio, is about 50 persons. And I showed that slide and talked about that kind of point of diminishing returns, because after about 30, you lose some sense of leadership and management and who's in charge. And we're one of those rare exceptions to that rule, in that we have a very horizontal structure. Although I think we're on the cusp of splitting. That's what happens when you grow a studio to a certain size. You eventually end up splitting it, and that's why we ended up with 27 different practice areas in our LA office. One good example is the retail practice area. It recently split from 80 to 40 and 40 around the expertise of retail, which would be boutique retail design, prototyping, and rollout. And then the other studio that was started was retail centers, which would be your malls and shopping centers. But in terms of project teams, they vary depending on the size of the project.
Other questions?
Yeah, I wanted to know, in terms of the various projects that you have here in the U.S. and abroad, use of water in the building, like gray water, do you see more, people who are managing projects or funding the projects more interested in reusing the water or having gray water element to the projects abroad versus here?
More so abroad, I would say, and it has to do with policy and legislational requirements. And this is why I was mentioning the fact that we have to have a more open discussion with our policymakers, the cities that we operate in. There aren't necessarily, aside from California, because it's very strict there, the policies in place to require those types of measures. It's really at the discretion of the owner more than anything. And unfortunately for our practice, commercial office buildings, and a lot of our other practice areas, our clients are largely speculative, so they aren't working that into their pro forma, their financial pro forma, because it's not required. It's really a good faith measure.
Other questions? thinking, I have one. Do you know the people in your other firms in the States? Do you communicate with them, or is it pretty isolated once you're in your own firm?
It's very much collaborative on the regional level, like I mentioned. Outside of that, it's dependent on projects. So if there are large-scale projects, and not to jump back to HOK, but that would be a good example, where a project on the scale of KAUST or CMA, where there was a specific expertise in another office that we needed to tap. Those are the opportunities that we would seek to kind of round out the portfolio for that project.
Yes.
When you put all these offices together, like you did the charrette, et cetera, I mean, is there a single person that's dealing with the business aspect of all of this, the billing hours and dealing with the client and all of that? I mean, how does that work with such a massive group of people?
Yeah, absolutely, and usually it's more than one person. It's usually a team of people that are managing not only the client expectations, but also the team members. And you have to have that division of labor in a way that almost runs interference for the design team. That point of contact with the client and the developers and the construction managers, so that the design team can focus on what they need to do. Otherwise, given the requirements of the schedule, it would be impossible to do.
Jim.
Just curious, because you're not an AE firm, so how do you coordinate with all these different groups and all these things with consultants?
We outsource to consultants, so we have, as most firms that only have an architectural background, we have a list of go-to guys that we would tap for any particular project, and we would refer them to the client. Did that answer your question?
I suppose, but is there any different, how you relate with these things that might be different than another firm, since you have this
I guess the argument is that you might be more integrated if you had A&E capabilities in-house, and that could be the case. That was certainly what it was with HOK. It's entirely dependent on the dynamic of the groups. So if you're very entwined with your engineers and they're part of the process, the design process, and can support you, then it can benefit the project in the end. There's no reason that you can't have that same relationship with your go-to consultants as outsourced members of the team if you have that same kind of dynamic collaboration.
It would seem, just out of curiosity, because it would seem that you would have less control over the personnel. That is to say, if you're working with a large office, who is working on this particular project? Probably not one of the principals, so you have,
Yeah.
because it's outsourced, what kind of input do you have on which of their group is working on this particular project?
No, you're exactly right. The other benefit from the client side is that there's a single source of liability if you're an A&E firm. The downfall for the firm itself is that there's an increased liability. And I think the rationale from a Gensler standpoint, as opposed to HOK, which does have internal engineering, is that design is our focus. That's what we do well, and there's no reason to bring those supplemental consultants in-house.
Paul.
You mentioned a project-wide.
Speak up so everyone can hear.
Yeah, you mentioned a project-wide and a short aside, project-wide Dillis video.
Yeah.
I'm wondering, does Gensler sometimes joint venture with other architects who've
Yeah.
initiated a design already, and how does that kind of work? I mean, do you then step in as a design development team, a production team, or?
Yeah, it works both ways. In the case of the Broad, we were the architect of record. We certainly had, because of the point at which Diller, Scofidio, and Renfro came on board with us and partnered, it was early enough in the game where we had a substantial impact on the design, and really, again, it was collaborative in nature. There are other projects, for instance, the Metropolis project that I mentioned to you, the residential towers, that too is a joint venture where we are the design architects in that case, but because we don't do residential for liability purposes, we partnered with another local which did the documentation.
but normally it's not Gensler going out to some other design architect, it's the other way around. Dilla Scafidio coming to Gensler, or someone like them coming.
That's typically the case, but yeah, it depends on the project that's being chased and the expertise, yeah. And of course, with 26 or 27 practice areas, it's hard to say that we don't have the expertise. And of course, we are a world-renowned design firm as well, but yeah, I mean, Dilla Scafidio, Renfro has their own cachet.
Piggybacking on that, so for Riyadh or whatever, you hire a local firm for knowledge of codes or?
Yeah.
Yeah, you do.
And there you have the issue of insurance and taxation, among other things. So for instance, on KAUST, the Cambridge University of Science and Technology, we were not permitted to work in the kingdom for a certain period of time because it was viewed as having an office there. And if we have an office there, then you're taxed. And you also run into the encumbrance of insurance issues. So yeah, in all cases, in those two cases where we worked in Saudi Arabia, those were joint ventures. There was a local firm by the name of Amrania for the Cma Tower. And then, like I mentioned, my 3-month stint in Paris, that was with a contractor or a construction manager by the name of Saudi Auger International. So they did the final documentation for that project.
We'll take 1 or 2 more questions and then go to the reception. Yes?
I just wanted to understand, what are some of the logistical issues that you have on projects that you do here in the US versus in other countries?
Logistical? The time difference is a big one. Language can be an issue, culture, obviously. John mentioned code, so having those guys on the ground, the locals, that can inform us of the differences is crucial. But yeah, I think it boils down ultimately to communication. That's the biggest issue, and communication tied to language and culture differences. Two examples. The Metropolis project was my first foray into doing a design presentation via video conference that was translated to Chinese. So that was a culture shock for sure. And then this new project that I'm working on in downtown LA, which is blocks away from Metropolis, we had a go-to meeting with an English-speaking person in China in our Shanghai office just 2 days ago, and we were in our LA office. So the kind of comparison is that despite the fact that the design presentation was being translated, we had a much better meeting with that client than we did with the other English-speaking client because we just weren't on the same page. So it boils down at the end of the day to communication and expectations more than anything.
One more question, is there? Yes?
How environmentally friendly are your buildings?
What? You talk too fast for me.
How environmentally friendly are your buildings?
It depends on the project. Again, the KAUST project was extremely industry, kind of at the forefront of the industry in terms of sustainable measures. A lot of the projects that I showed you that have come out of the commercial office building district or commercial office building practice area in LA, again, because they're speculative in nature, aren't generally, aside from some LEED certification for marketing purposes. So this is again where you, as the next generation of architects, need to lead the effort in the profession and in the industry to push for those measures and make them necessary.
Let's go have dessert and
Sounds
some
great.
drinks and...
Thanks. Appreciate it.